What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, it's trade targets. You know the drill. 4 running backs, 4 wide receivers, half of which will be buy low targets. The other half, they're going to be sell high targets. This week has been a little tough because I think by this point in the season, we have a good understanding of what the good players are and what the bad players are. The good ones, they're rising to the top, where the bad ones, they're either inconsistent or they're falling to the bottom. So some of these may not be the lowest you're going to buy these players at or the highest you're going to sell these players at, but I really think that these guys are going to have great market value this week. Before we do get into the video though, please make sure you're following both Nick and I on Twitter. We're answering hundreds of questions a week, so if you guys want some one-on-one time with us, make sure you're following us there. But the forgotten man in this backfield is actually Duke Johnson, who's coming off a terrible performance against what was a poor defense. How poor was his performance? Well, it was the worst one of the past 5 weeks, which is really saying something because everyone expected this uptick in production, and that's why you can take advantage of these panicked owners who may have just taken him off the waiver wire or stashed him on the bench hoping for some upside. He's only owned in about 60% of leagues, which means some of you may not actually need to trade for him. If he's on your waiver wire, go ahead and grab him, but I still think he's not going to be hard to land, and there certainly are better days ahead for Duke Johnson. Remember, they are paying him a buttload of money. With Carlos Hyde gone, it's only a matter of time until they get Duke Johnson more involved. Remember, he is still one of the premier pass-catching backs in the league. I wouldn't trade starter level production for him because, let's face it, he hasn't shown us enough to be worth starter level value. At least the volume hasn't been there. But for a buy low candidate that has a lot of upside, I think he can definitely be your guy. So send out an offer for him, see what they're asking for, and see if you can get him on your team. Now the next buy low is one I would consider a league winning type of player, and that's Christian McCaffrey. And I know some of you are thinking, how can you buy low on Christian McCaffrey? Everyone loves him. Well, yes, it's undeniable that he is a top option at the running back position, especially in those PPR leagues, but in fact, he is coming off of back-to-back mediocre performances where he has scored 13.6 points and 14 points, and those are in PPR leagues. That's production that you can get almost anywhere week to week. So I know most of you are probably thinking, what type of idiot would trade away Christian McCaffrey? Well, you got to think of it this way. You're not going to get him for cheap, or at least super cheap, but imagine that he scored 25 points in each of these past 2 games. There was no way you can land him. You have an opportunity right now before he blows up to send out a solid offer and get him on your team. And for those of you that think good players are just untouchable, that's just not correct. I mean, technically Gurley is untouchable. You'd have to be an idiot to trade him, but McCaffrey's price is at an all-time low. He's been averaging under 25 rushing yards per game and hasn't scored. Now he faces Baltimore. So while his owners aren't necessarily disappointed, they certainly aren't valuing him as their best player on the team. So I'm telling you, McCaffrey can win you leagues. He faces the Saints and the Falcons in weeks 15 and 16. Both teams, they put up a ton of points. And the last time that he actually played the Falcons, he had 14 receptions for 100 yards. If that's the type of production you're getting in the fantasy playoffs, that's going to help you win a championship. So he's going to be expensive, but he's the cheapest he could be all season. If you guys are looking for players that have that league-winning upside, well, here it is. Over to the buy low wide receivers. This is another guy I really think that can take your team to the next level, who you can actually get your hands on for a short period of time. I don't think you can for long, but that's Stef Diggs. I put out a tweet saying how I've never been more wrong about a player before than I was on Adam Thielen. I stand by that. That dude's a monster. He really surprised me. I'll be the first to admit that I'm wrong. Thielen scored a touchdown in 5 of 7 games, even posting 100 receiving yards in every game this season. But the reason I bring that up is because of Thielen's success, Stef Diggs isn't getting enough attention from fantasy owners. He has a combined 66 receiving yards in his last 2 games, and believe me, his owners are also frustrated watching Thielen completely ball out and getting most of the production. Well, now's your time to target Diggs. He's still a back-end wide receiver 1 with weekly top 5 upside. He's shown it before. He's going to have better games in the future. And at this point in the season, it's really difficult to get your hands on a back-end wide receiver 1. If you don't act now, though, the opportunity to get Diggs may slip through your hands because he faces New Orleans, and this could be his get-right game. If he goes off for another 20 points, his price is going to climb along with it, and you may not have another opportunity to grab him again. So if you have the chance, send out an offer for Diggs. He is going to be my top wide receiver target this week. The final buy low wide receiver we have is Tate. And unlike the last 2 players, this isn't a league winner, but he definitely is someone who can help you build a balanced team. In fantasy, our teams, our rosters, they need to have the combination of a safe floor and a high ceiling, and there are few players that provide a safer floor than Tate. His bad games, They're like 10 PPR points, but he still has 20-point upside. Currently, he's ranked 14th in targets and is coming off 2 of his worst performances of the season. So similar to Diggs, when the owners are watching the Lions games and they're seeing Galladay performing really well and they're seeing Marvin Jones with these long touchdowns and they think that's eating into his production. Well, in reality, that's not the case. Tate is still on pace to tie his career high in receptions and reach over 1,200 receiving yards. Oh, and did I mention, he is also on pace to set a career high in touchdowns. So it's a long season though. A player can go through some ups and downs, but still, it's very promising to see what Tate has done so far this season, and he's still a very reliable player to own. And considering that the wide receiver position is so inconsistent right now, we have a bunch of new guys with new names coming out and performing one week, having a dud the other. Tate is exactly the guy that your team needs. That's it for the sell highs. Now let's move over to the buy lows. And for these running backs, they are coming off of decent performances, but I am considering these guys just liquidate them now before they completely fall off a cliff. The first one being Lamar Miller. Now, he is coming off of his best game of the season, and it couldn't have come at a better time because it lines up perfectly with the impending return of Deontay Foreman. Now, there's no news yet if Foreman is coming back this week, but either way, it's still a good idea to start sending out offers for Miller before his volume starts falling off. And I'm not saying that it's going to completely fall off a cliff immediately as soon as Foreman comes back. Remember, he had a serious injury, the type of injury where you can't have a full workload, at least not soon, and you lose a lot of strength and power and usually efficiency along with that. So I would expect him just to continue to eat into his production slowly and while he builds up that workload. But either way, Miller's a volume guy. He needs volume to produce in fantasy, so expecting him to retain this type of volume is very unlikely. And people who you are going to send trade offers for, they're probably going to be interested in the matchup coming up this week. Use that as a selling point. They play Miami, who has allowed a 100-yard rusher in 5 of 7 games this season. So even though for most owners, you're probably thinking, well, let me take advantage of this Miami game, and then I'll ship him off after this game. Well, what happens if he doesn't perform well in this game? Then what? Then you have Foreman coming back. Nobody's going to want him at that point. They already aren't going to pay top dollar for Lamar Miller, but you have to package in the best deal you can, and right now selling him off of his best game of the season along with a good matchup next week is going to be your best bet to get this deal done. I personally would not hold on to him any longer or risk it and would rather try making a deal trading him right away. The next guy I'm looking to unload this week is Jordan Howard, and at this point there's just no need to hold on to Howard anymore. It's been 7 weeks and it couldn't be clear the direction that this team is going at the RB position. The only glimmer of hope for Howard would be if an injury were to happen to Cohen, and yeah, he's a small guy, but essentially that just makes him a super valuable handcuff because on his own, he's been abysmal. He had 10 receptions in his first 3 games, which was promising, but since then, he has had just 1. On top of that, he's also been averaging 13 touches per game through that same span, which just isn't enough to have consistent production at the running back position. Thankfully, though, he did end up landing in the end zone, so that gave him somewhat of a fantasy relevant day. He did have double-digit points, but to expect him to land in that type of situation every week, it's just highly unlikely. When you're not relying on volume, it just increases your risk of volatility. And let's face it, Jordan Howard is much more likely to have a dud game than to actually help your team. I'd suggest packaging him in with another player to get the best return because nobody is going to want Jordan Howard straight up for a starter level player. But the name itself, Jordan Howard, still holds enough value to interest people if he comes in the form of a package. Sticking with the name value trend, this is a player you're not selling at peak value, but it's a guy who has enough name value to get the players that you want. That player is Keenan Allen of the Chargers, and when it comes to Allen, I have some major concerns. Yes, he's been solid, but he hasn't been great, and he hasn't scored since week 1. For a wide receiver, you need those touchdowns. And from everything that I see, it's a trend that I do expect to continue because the Chargers are simply not targeting Allen in the red zone. Unless they switch up their game plan from this point forward, the upside that we saw from Allen last season is a thing of the past. So far, Mike Williams has been the guy that Rivers looks to in the end zone, and we can't expect that to change. Remember, Keenan Allen, he was never really a touchdown guy to begin with. He was more based on PPR volume, and at this point we can't even count on that type of production because he has 11 targets in the past 2 games, and those were against middle of the pack defenses. He has actually only seen double-digit targets twice and is currently on pace to finish with 128. Just to give you guys a little bit of reference, last season Keenan Allen had 159 targets, so you can see why I have some major concerns with him. Yes, he did heat up during the second half of the season, but even through this same 7-game sample last season, he was averaging 10 targets per game. And it's also undeniable that that this team just has more weapons than they have had in the previous seasons with Allen. They're moving the ball well, and they don't have to force feed Keenan Allen. So I trade him now because he's one of the few receivers that you can get those big name players for. Just keep in mind, he does have a bye week this week, which may make him a little bit of a tougher sell. The final player is probably going to get the most buzz, but I think you just have to get rid of him now and shoot some offers out, because I think some players in your leagues may be interested, and that is Amari Cooper. Everyone knows by now, Cooper just left Oakland. He's headed to Dallas, which means there are a lot of unknowns with this situation. Whenever there are unknowns in fantasy football, it presents risk, but it also presents upside. And with Cooper, you should all know by now, he's going to disappoint. This move may make a lot of sense to Cowboys fans, and maybe they're excited about it, but it's hard to imagine that you could downgrade at the quarterback position from Derek Carr. But let's face it, Dak Prescott, while he has more natural ability with his rushing ability, as an actual pocket passer, Derek Carr is much more suited to feed the ball to Amari Cooper than Dak Prescott is. I don't think Amari Cooper is going to make a huge impact, at least not this season, and I don't think his skill set matches up with Dak Prescott that well whatsoever. So simply put, I don't think Cooper is going to turn Dak Prescott into someone that he hasn't been throughout his career. And then you have to add on the fact that there will be a learning curve in order to integrate him in the offense. We saw Josh Gordon go to the Patriots, and yes, that's a more timing based offense. Everyone has to be in the right position if you want to get the ball, but we see Josh Gordon, he's now picking it up and getting more integrated in the offense, but it's been a few weeks now. So imagine Amari Cooper, who hasn't been known to be the best off of the field and in practice, and who already struggles in game. It's going to be really difficult. And then that's not the only reason. Think of this. The Cowboys, they are ranked 26th in the amount of plays that they run. Oakland, they were ranked 14th. Ideally, more plays turn into more opportunities, turn into more production. And in Dallas, it's just not conducive to a positive game script for fantasy. So overall, it's a situation that I'd want to avoid. And with the amount of Cowboys fans that are out there, there is bound to be one guy in your league that's willing to take the gamble on it. And last week, you couldn't trade Amari Cooper for some magic beans. So take advantage of it now, see what you can get in return. And if you have any trade questions, let us know on Twitter. We'll be happy to answer them for you. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.